I'm an air marshal. This is my plea for help for Flight 802. Written by Insomnia Storyteller. I boarded the plane in Denver, as I had so many times before. Being an air marshal, you get used to the ins and outs of flying, and you learn pretty easily how people are going to behave on a flight. You get the older people who think they're clever clapping when the plane lands. Moms with new babies they try desperately to quiet, but to no avail. And the businessmen who just want to land so they can get back to sexting whichever secretary they are into at the moment. I took my seat, as always, on the window in the back of the plane, as I always preferred. Standing up, I could see everyone looking around as little as possible. Next to me was a woman and her toddler. The kid happily plugged into headphones watching some cartoon on his iPad, while the mother was closing her eyes to get whatever sleep she could when the kid was entertained. We took off smoothly, and I figured it was going to be a boring flight, as usual. However, as you can tell, that's not the case. Flight 802 to Dallas should have been fairly short, and I became a bit nervous when we were in the air longer than I had thought necessary. I was about to flag down a stewardess to ask what was going on when the speakers came on and the pilot announced,
"Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing a bit of circling. It appears there are some storms over our runway, and our best move is to wait them out. Thank you for your patience and for flying with us."
I signed, settling into my seat a bit relieved. At least the kid I was next to wasn't a brat, and everyone seemed to be fairly calm. Suddenly, there was a bump, and the plane jostled a bit. People cried out, clearly startled, and the flight attendants appeared to be running around a little more. Another bump, and the oxygen mask dropped down. Everyone began to do as they had told us in the safety demonstration before the flight, trying to fasten their own mask before helping others. Foolishly, I decided to help the kid next to me while his mom struggled with her mask. I had used these many times before, so I figured I could handle mine with ease, and it would help the poor woman out a bit. I was fastening him in and had moved on to mine when shit started to hit the fan. I had been fighting with the little baggie on the end of my mask and was having a hard time getting the air to flow. Bending the tube a bit, I was trying to work it around when I found a pinhole in the tubing. Of course, I would end up with a defective mask. I was about to flag down a flight attendant when I noticed something odd. The kid's mom, who by this point had taken a few breaths in her mask, slumped over, eyes shut. Her kid did the same, not 2 seconds later, and I saw the rest of the passengers beginning to do this as well. I became even more concerned when I saw the flight attendants running around checking on people, none of them with masks on themselves, as they should have had.
"All good in first class,"
one called from the front of the plane.
"Out like a light. This shit really works. How long do we have until they wake up?"
Fuck, I thought. What the fuck could be happening right now? People were passing out, but I hadn't felt the slightest bit woozy. I realized to my utter horror, there must have been something in the air being pumped into people's systems via the mask. I wasn't feeling it because my mask wasn't working. I made a split-second decision to pretend I too had inhaled whatever this was, as it seemed the whole flight crew was in on some scheme. It was a damn good thing I did too, as they soon reached my aisle and checked on everyone, making sure no one was aware of the current situation. I fought to stay awake, and from what I could tell, we traveled for a few more hours before beginning to descend. Around me, all the passengers were still unconscious, and the flight crew was still patrolling for anyone who happened to stir. Upon landing, everyone's mask remained on, and I heard the doors of the plane open. More footsteps filled the aisle, and I heard squeaking wheels and bodies being moved with heavy grunts. Carefully, I opened one eye ever so slightly, having to hold in a gasp at what I saw. There were several men in lab coats putting bodies onto gurneys they had in the aisles and wheeling them out of the plane. It was an assembly line of people moving bodies. I quickly shut my eyes again, fearing what would happen if I was caught. I carefully moved my hand down to my holstered gun, knowing they would find it on me when it came my turn to be lifted. Sliding it out and into my sleeve, I removed the gun and tried to conceal it as best as possible. I needed it to be on hand, but knew I was outnumbered in that moment. I then removed the holster and shoved it under my seat, hoping they wouldn't see it. Soon enough, I could hear the woman and her child next to me being moved, and knew it was my turn next. I felt a rough hand grab my arm, and tried my best to remain limp while I was being dragged from my chair and lifted into the gurney in the aisle. Fighting the fear creeping up in my body, I remained as still as possible and kept my eyes shut, trying not to breathe too fast or too hard. I was taken outside and immediately was hit by a wall of humidity and heat. I had been to Texas, and while it was hot there, it didn't compare to what I felt now. I figured we must have been somewhere further south, and felt the panic rise further in my throat. The wheels beneath me squeaked as I was rolled away from the plane and into some building. Definitely not an airport. I was further pushed, and after a few minutes and turns, I felt the movement stopped. I was lifted again and placed onto some kind of examination bed. I could tell by the crinkly paper rustling underneath me, and heard a door shut and a latch click as the footsteps faded away. Slowly, I opened my eyes again. I was in some kind of sterile room, windowless and cold. A door stood before me, and I knew immediately I was stuck. There was a handle, but above it was a deadbolt keyhole. It must have been that which I heard as whoever brought me into the room exited. There was really nothing around me, save for some cabinets, all of which were locked. Feeling helpless, but knowing I had to act soon, I tried to devise a plan. I didn't know who brought me here or why I was there, but I did know that they had not taken my gun. I felt its comforting cold metal on my skin, and I knew I would have to use it. I hardly had time to think before I heard the deadbolt sliding again, forcing me to close my eyes. 2 sets of footsteps entered, talking to each other in disgustingly jovial voices.
I'd love to get my hands on the woman in room 6. I bet they'll use her as a breeder. And the torso in room 14. They're definitely going to use him as a base. He's got quite the build.
Yeah, he'll make a good fighter for sure. A chest like that goes a long way. Too bad he skipped leg day.
And they both chuckled, approaching me. They began poking at my legs, and the same one said,
Looks like this guy hit the gym too, and made sure to use those leg machines. Maybe they'll put these on the torso in 14. That would make for one hell of a soldier.
As they approached my thighs and were moving to my chest, I felt them unzipping my sweatshirt. I had to act now, and act fast. I slipped the safety off, put my finger on the trigger, and snapped my eyes open. 2 men stood over me, both in coats and carrying clipboards. I lifted my right arm and fired 2 shots, one at each of them. They didn't see it coming, and both fell to the ground after direct hits to the head. I tried to collect myself and began searching their pockets for keys. I found them shortly, as well as one of their phones, which I took in hopes of calling for help. Fumbling through the key ring, I found the one that opened my door. I turned it and stepped into the hallway before me. It was lined with doors as far as I could see, with big swinging doors on either end of the corridor. Trying to recall which way I had come, I decided on right and ran for it. I came up to the doors on the end and peeked through the glass. I had most definitely not found the way out. I found something much worse. Before me was some kind of operating room with 2 doctors and 2 patients on their respective tables. One had a buzzsaw or something in his hand and was hacking away at the arms of one man while the other was looking for something on the wall behind them. The wall was covered in limbs and body parts of all kinds, hanging from hooks or sealed in jars. The doctor picked up what had to be a leg and walked over to his patient, placed the leg down where the body was missing one, and began to stitch it onto the man's open wound. I ran in that moment, and ran as though my life depended on it. Although, I guess it really did. By some miracle, I escaped unseen and took off towards some trees I saw in the distance. I don't know if I've ever moved so fast, but seeing as the men were impressed with my legs, I guess you could say they wouldn't be surprised. Behind me, I heard alarms starting to go off, and sirens wailing something awful. They must have discovered the men in my room and knew I had gotten out. It's only a matter of time before they find me, and I have no way of defending myself against all of them. I have this phone, and I think this is my best defense. While I may not make it out alive, I need to tell people what is happening here. I don't know for sure, but I think they're assembling some kind of army of Frankenstein's monsters or some fuckery like that. Who they are, I'm not sure. But if anyone reads this, please send help. Not only for the people here, but to stop what's coming next. Whatever they're building for, I know it's not going to be good.